Okay, we should be set.
Okay, fantastic. Today is April 14, 2020. We are starting with a joint City Council Planning Commission workshop. And before we get started, Summer, will you please do a roll call to announce all of the names of the people on this call, please?
I will.
attending
I am
this
just
meeting.
going to go down the list if that is okay with you.
Thank you.
So I have Mayor Emily Niehaus, City Council Member Tawny Knutson Boyd, Assistant City Manager Carly Castle, Moab City Assistant Planner Corey Shirtliff, City Manager Joel Linares, Moab City Council Member Kaylin Jones, Moab City Council Member Karen Guzman Newton, Finance Director Clint York, Moab City Planning Commission Chair Kai Marienfeld, City Attorney Lori Simonson, Luke, I apologize because I'm going to butcher your name, but Moab City Planning Commission Member Luke, Moab City Council Member Mike Duncan, our Moab City Planning Director Nora Shepard, and Moab City Council Member Ronnie Daraseri.
Okay, so from the Planning Commission, we only have two Planning Commission members tonight. Is that correct?
Correct.
Seems
For
like
now.
I apologize. That was not my expectation. I thought there would be more of us here tonight.
Yeah, I did too. I sent out another sort of update today. So I don't know.
Just received a message from Becky that she might be able to join in. So I'm coordinating with her right now.
And I have communicated with Brian Ballard. He was going to try, but apparently he's been unsuccessful.
Well, maybe they're having a little bit of computer issues on their end as well.
Yeah.
So then, is that everybody from the Planning Commission? Is that the full roster?
No, we're missing Ruben, Jesso, and Marianne.
And haven't heard back from them. Okay.
No.
Well, here's what I think. I think that's okay. So tonight anyway, this is a City Council meeting with the members of the Planning Commission present for our workshop. And so noticed as such, we'll just go ahead and move forward with this workshop. The intention is to really get back on the same page and let Nora lead us, guide us as council members through a series of questions. Hopefully that will help inform her of what to bring back to the Planning Commission for us to move forward with overnight accommodation work. So with that, Nora, I'll set myself to mute, and it looks like most of us are muted anyway. So I guess we can mute and unmute ourselves since there's so many of us on this call. And if anybody does have a question or would like to make a comment, it appears I have everybody up on my screen, so I'll be able to call on. Does that sound okay to everybody? Awesome. Take it away, Nora.
So Emily, you were breaking up just a little bit, just so you're aware. You might want to lean a little closer to your microphone. So let me just tell you what we're going to do, and then we'll launch in. I'm aware that what I sent you is an old draft, and that many of the city council members and planning commissioners have made comments on that draft. And I have all those comments, and I acknowledge all of them. And I'm about to dive back in to make revisions accordingly. And there's still a fair amount of work to do. And so before I launched in on doing that work, and before Planning Commission started really reviewing specific items, I wanted to just kind of make sure that we're all on the same page. So I prepared a little PowerPoint presentation that asks some sort of overarching big picture questions. And then I'm prepared to talk about the kind of major sections of the development standards and what kinds of comments we got and where we're going to go from there. And what I would ask is that you let me do the presentation. And then at the end, I'll go back to the kind of overarching questions. If you have your what I sent out, the exhibit A of what I sent out, if you have that, it would be good for you to follow along when I start talking about the standards. And there are already some comments there, but you know, it would be helpful either if you have it up on your screen or have a paper copy or whatever. That would probably be good. Okay, let me share my screen if I can. Can you guys see that?
Not yet.
Ah, it should. It should be on your computer. No? It's not on your computers?
No, not yet. It doesn't have the Nora Shepherd sharing her screen bar at the top that normally indicates that. Is there another pop-up box prompting which screen you want to share? That happens sometimes.
Yeah, and I thought I hit the right one. Let me try it again.
Okay.
Maybe the waves at the beach are interfering with
No,
your screen sharing.
Using this earlier today and it worked great. So I'm a little bit confused here. You see anything?
No.
Oh, that is really weird. Frustrating. Start screen share. Screen one. There. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Sorry. All right. From beginning. Okay, so as I launch into making amendments in order to move this forward, I wanted to make sure that the council is still committed to this process to explore allowing overnight accommodations with revised development standards in the resort commercial zone only at this time. Is that still a priority for you? And does everyone still agree with the premise that we allow new overnight accommodations in the RC zone and choose to regulate new projects through enhanced development standards? So those are sort of the overarching questions that I want you to answer at the end. But I'm going to go through this slideshow real briefly to kind of just talk about what we've been working on. So we've received a number of comments. Ronnie, Mike, everybody has given me comments, and then they're varied, and sometimes they're contradictory. So as I move forward, you know, I need to try to do my best to balance some of those things. And where we are in the process is that at the last city council meeting, the City Council wanted the Planning Commission specifically to look at building size questions and to review the energy efficiency requirements, because those are two things that we still have some questions about. So I'm assuming at this point the development standard is still how we intend to regulate overnight accommodations, but you guys need to tell me if you're still on board with that, and then kind of what your highest priorities are for those development standards. In other words, what are we trying to not extract, but what are we trying to get in return as a benefit for allowing overnight accommodations, and what the most important things are. And then finally, has anybody had a new idea brainstorm, or has your thinking evolved since we last discussed this? So this is in order, and it's very brief, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. So energy efficiency, there were questions about the practicality of the 80% energy generation on site. The Planning Commission has met with one solar person who gave them some background information on feasibility of that. The conclusion being that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve that. We've asked another person in the biz also to participate in a future Planning Commission meeting, and we will continue to work on it. Whether we come back with 80% of electricity, or whether we come back with 50% on site, you know, those either of those ways is certainly an option, but it definitely needs to be either further defined or modified based upon input by the experts in the field. Water, our water board, which I know is not the official title, but they have reviewed the water recommendations and support them. And we would add gray water requirements for common facilities with the same language. This is my understanding, as we left it last, with the clarification that we add a gray water requirement for common facilities once it's allowed, basically by state law. And the water board was happy with the recommendations. Transportation, we received quite a number of comments, and we will continue to clarify those. There were some questions about what we really need for bike storage. Did it make any sense we had two conflicting inputs on oversized parking requirements. So there were a number of different items. I think the primary ones that we require them to provide space for a shuttle and a shuttle stop is obviously still an important component for us. Mixed use. This various different comments have been received. And again, I think various commissioners and city council members have different priorities in their heads. So I know that the Planning Commission believes fairly strongly that one of the benefits that is important for the city of Moab in this process is to require additional commercial uses that would not only serve the visitor population in that corridor, but also would allow for space for community commercial types of uses that may make sense out there a little ways, but you know, there's not a space for those kinds of things right now in town, or the lease rate is too high. And so we intend to have a base minimum requirement for commercial use within the hotel. And then we had talked about adding an incentive to make it more attractive for them to provide additional commercial uses, whether that be in a separate building, or separate little center, or whether it be in the incorporated into the hotel complex itself. And my question, and you could just make note of this, is this an important component to city council? Should we require it or incentivize it, or both? Civic open space, I think civic space, it's really hard to define. So at this point, I'm looking at perhaps eliminating that requirement, but requiring either public art or financial contribution to civic space or public art, one or the other, and we'd have to come up with formulas, obviously, based on what's being proposed. So that seems to be the direction that we're headed, but we can certainly talk about that more. Open space, I want to relook at that a little bit, about the minimums that we've kind of finally ended up with that are consistent with the counties. I don't know if they make sense or not. And so I was going to relook at those and see if what is there is what we still want to recommend. Building height, I think we did a little visual preference survey thing with the Planning Commission where they looked at all the existing hotels in town. We took the names off so that we were trying not to shame. And we went through this, we looked at all of them and then talked about what struck us from that conversation. I think people had different opinions, of course, and I think we're starting to see now with the world mark going up, is that 3 stories is generally too tall. And that we want to require 2 stories as a maximum. And then unless we decide to provide incentives for additional, whether it be commercial uses or housing, and that then they could get a maximum of 3 stories. And we would need to add some language about some specific view sheds probably. And again, we'd need more clarification and ratios on how many additional affordable housing units or how much additional commercial square footage you'd have to provide in order to get that extra story. Building area, this is a similar question. And this should say building area, but that's okay. So what we had talked about before was a maximum of 20,000 square feet per building and 40,000 square feet per project total. I think the counties is 20 and 50,000. And then again, this should be building square footage. Do we want to still consider additional building height or a building square footage for additional employee housing? Or additional commercial beyond the minimum. And employee housing, of course, would be above and beyond what's already required as part of the Wahoo ordinance. That will not change. We're not looking at reducing that amount at all. And that is a requirement. This would be above and beyond that. Site configuration and design guidelines. Do you still want to regulate these and have them included in the site and building design beyond what our current standards already say in the code? And we are in the process of creating visual graphics, especially on the site planning side. But is this, a lot of the site configuration are fairly subjective, and they're not things that we can necessarily measure. And do we want to eliminate those, or because they're not measurable, or do we want to keep them in and have them for points of discussion as the projects move through the process? And then finally, building materials. We had some discussion about stucco and it being great and useful if it's good quality and durable, considered a durable siding material, and that this is something we might need to refine and to define what stucco means, as opposed to a system like an EIFS, which is less durable than traditional stucco or some of the new stuccos that are out there. So we'll need to refine that a little more. I think it's important for us to allow something in terms of stucco, but I would hate for us for everything to turn out in a product that's not as durable and will look shabby after a while. So those are kind of the development. Those are briefly the input I received and the direction that we're going. So now, what I want to know is the City Council still committed to the process to explore allowing overnight accommodations with revised development standards in the resort commercial zone? Is this still a priority for you, given where we are today and everything that's going on?
Everybody, I cannot see whether hands are raised or not. I think for Nora, we should just go through with each council member, yes or no, and a comment.
On all 3 of these? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. And then, so is there priority? And then finally, are we still in agreement that the way we've decided to really regulate overnight accommodations in the resort commercial zone is through enhanced development standards, or if there's another emphasis that we want to move toward, either now or later, that's a different way of regulating those.
Okay, so let's just start with the first question first.
Okay.
Are you still committed to the process to explore allowing overnight accommodations with revised development standards in RC zone only? And I'll randomize it because of the, randomization suggestions. So Tawny, you're up.
Yes, is the short answer. I think we are committed to doing something. What that something is obviously has changed over the last few weeks, but I think we were headed in the right direction. We just needed to coalesce around the ideas and get on the same page or agree on at least some basic standards.
Okay.
Okay, Ronnie?
Like Tawny, basically, yes. I mean, any given day of the week, it falls higher or lower on the list, but we've committed a lot to it. So it seems like we also have been highly encouraged to allow something potentially somewhere. I guess one of the outlying questions for me still is if and how metering will fall in, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Okay, Kaylin?
So I'm still interested in pursuing this. I'm not sure what the priority is, just because it seems like for the next period of time, there may not be that much demand for new developments. And I went back through a list from 2018 of land use code related code revisions. And there's a whole list of things that the Planning Department and Planning Commission could work on. And it seems like working on overnight accommodations has been not all consuming, but largely consuming of the department's capacity. And so I'd kind of like to, it seems like we're close to the finish line for RC, but it seemed that way for a little while. So I don't want it to take up all surplus capacity for the next 6 months and not get other stuff done that I think is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, you're next.
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been conditionally committed to it. All right. And my questions kind of relate to Ronnie's metering. The public interest in this is not so much the nuances of standards that go into hotels and overnight accommodations, but the sheer number of them and the amount of new traffic they'll invite and resulting traffic congestion. That's what most residents see. We've adopted the notion that if we do it with just standards alone, in my mind, it gets tricky to set them appropriately. Too low and we're back where we were, too high and we'll get sued. And we could consider standards to be a way of metering, if you will, by slowing people down and making them consider what they might consider to be onerous standards and so forth. I've always liked, I think I've made no secret of it, the possible option, when I say conditional, of employing that second layer of arbitrary legislative discretion on whether we'll accept new developments one by one. And I'm willing to hold off on that for the moment if I'm convinced that we can do things with just standards alone. And I do think it's tricky, and I am nervous about trying to micromanage, if you will, what hotels should look like. I am not a hotel overnight accommodation designer, and if we choose to go with OAs with standards alone, I would certainly vote for making them more broadly and well-defined, hopefully, but Nora, you mentioned some of the things like facades and materials and so forth. I might well be inclined to simplify those and get them out of the path. So the short answer is conditionally, but I'm still keeping it in my mind that in the end, I might want some way of slowing down growth. I've also talked about just waiting 3 years for build out. Of course, coronavirus has gotten in the way of all that. Kalen's right, demand is down and so forth. So that's another option. So sorry for a complicated answer to a simple question.
No worries. And Karen, you're up.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, I'm interested in still pursuing this. In fact, there has been some phone calls directed at me asking if we are going forward. I think there is going to be interest coming up after COVID, and we might very well see that there's more interest in people being here. I mean, it's hard to say, and it's still early, but I mean, we've gotten very far. But I'm also interested in potentially like doing this all at once and not just picking the RC zone and then, you know, doing it at a pace that the Planning Commission can work on it and not, you know, I mean, I think there was a sense that we needed to get something done and something on the paper so that legislation would know that we were serious about working on this. I think we don't have the pressure that we did at even a couple months ago, but you know, it'd be interesting to do these for overnight accommodations at the same time, so it's not looking like we're picking just one area over another. But I don't know how if that's even a possibility or not.
So Karen, that would be, so you'd want us to look at the C2 and C3, for example, at the same time?
Mm-hmm. And I know that probably sounds scary because I mean, it's taken us quite a long time just to chew this off, but it feels like we're really close and it might not be as difficult moving forward with the other zones.
Okay, so Nora, do you want to move on? I kind of feel like the council members have shared sort of the answer to the is it a priority in their response. So so then really it seems like just going back to what you were saying, Karen, and giving everybody a chance to speak to it. Does everyone still agree with the premise that we allow new OAs in the RC zone and choose to regulate new projects through enhanced development standards? So I guess the question, it's a two-part question. Focus on RC, yes or no? And then development standards. I guess we could, then you could guide us through those based on your presentation in the few minutes that we have left. Does that sound okay? So
Yeah.
we'll go back to the beginning then and just kind of hit that question in particular, whether or not to focus on RC or not. So Tawny, you're first.
I guess I'd ask a question to the question, and going back to what Karen says, I guess I'd want to know what the major differences are between the RC zone and the C2 and the C3. Is it going to be so onerous to develop those standards simultaneously, or would it be better to do them one at a time? I can see benefits to both, but that would be my main question. And I do think that I tend to agree with Mike. I think using just development standards can be tricky, but I think it can be done. And I think we've got, you know, good people that are working on that. So we have to trust their expertise.
Ronnie?
Yeah, so I guess for me, it comes down to if by regulating new through enhanced development standards, we effectively mean no metering, because again, the metering is still something I'm concerned with. And like Tony, I see pros and cons to how we do this, but I do feel like we spent all this time on the RC and really considering the unique nature of the RC. So personally, I'd rather do and complete that one first before moving on to something else, because it is kind of its own unique animal. And then I appreciate Caitlin's comments too, like just back to the priority level that, I mean, I know for me, it's been a while since I've looked at that land use list. And I guess at some point it would help me in prioritizing to remind myself, and I can do that on my own, but what this is competing with for our limited time and attention.
Kaylin?
I'd like to focus on RC for now, and I am okay doing it with development standards. I also am sympathetic to Mike's concerns. I share those about, at the end of the day, what many of our citizens are concerned about are just the sheer volume of tourists in this town at certain times. And so I don't think that ultimately we're going to be able to escape that question, but RC is small enough. I know it still adds a significant number of units and beds potentially, but it is the resort commercial zone. So I'm willing to stay the course with RC, but I think that other zones are bigger and more complex, and I'd like to consider working on overnight accommodations in those in the context of an overall work plan and priorities for the planning department.
Okay, Mike?
Well, I really answered this question more or less my first pass. The only thing that's new is whether to consider other zones at the same time. I have mixed feelings about it. You know, go ahead and finish something up here has a lot to be said for it, to get something on the board, as other people have pointed out. The only reason for considering other zones at the same time is consistency in my mind, particularly for heights, building heights and incentives. We keep talking about 3-4 stories, 40 feet. You guys, when we were talking about hotspot funds and building heights downtown, you know, I was concerned about 40 feet there, and view sheds and all that kind of thing, how we define view sheds and obstructions to them. If we were to take a quick look at C2 and C3, for example, and strive for consistency there, with consistency with height and view sheds out in the RC zone, it might make the whole thing a lot more seamless. That would be one reason to take a quick look, if you will, at C2 and C3 before we bless any one of the zones.
Thanks, Mike. And Karen?
Again, I mean, I appreciate the work that's been done. I would like to finish something, take it off of our list. But again, I mean, if it was possible, I personally would try to look at all overnight accommodations at the same time.
Okay. Okay, so in terms of what development standards specifically, or if we're going to allow overnight accommodations, and let's talk about the RC zone right now, if we're going to allow that, what are the most important sort of community benefits that each of you think are important as a trade-off to allow those new overnight accommodations? In other words, is energy efficiency the most important thing? Is additional commercial with some restrictions and try to get more commercial areas for smaller businesses? Is it trying to leverage additional workforce housing? What are people's, or do we want, is the primary goal just to make them look better? So what I would like to know, and maybe lower height and those kinds of things. So I would like to know kind of which of the standards that we've been dealing with do you think are the most important in terms of getting for what we give. In other words, what kinds of benefits we want for the community in exchange for additional overnight accommodations.
I can just call through the council again. Maybe that's the easiest. Tawny?
Personally, I think mixed use is probably a priority. I'd like to explore a little bit more the open space and the civic space, how those are defined. Some additional spaces for small businesses is probably that's where I see a benefit to the community. I think the energy efficiency is important, but I wouldn't rank it as number one. And I think aesthetics is important, but it's also very subjective. What somebody might think is a gorgeous structure, somebody else might think is just horrific. So I think we have to strike a balance there.
Ronnie?
I can't really pick one thing over the other because kind of to me, the whole list of what we've come up with is an important package together. So a combined variety of uses with more commercial, like that whole idea of getting commercial on the ground floor, so we're not losing that opportunity, but then also providing the opportunity for housing in that corridor. So and then also very important for me is staying within the confines of the water we have. And I know we're still waiting on water studies, but again, it's a little bit hard. And I feel like one of the biggest things for the community is making sure that we haven't over allocated our aquifer. And this is all a little bit hard to do without knowing where we are there. But I guess that's it. Combined uses, more commercial space, housing, and being smart about water and the energy with that, because I think Corona is just the tip of the iceberg for what we're going to see with climate change and needing to be adjustable and ready.
Okay.
Kaylin?
Oh, I think my top priority is to continue to address housing. I've raised this before, but I'm still a little concerned that developers may use these additional standards to use the alternate calculation provision in Wahoo to get out of the housing requirement or parts of it. And I'm reluctant to trade some of what we're talking about in the current code for reduced housing component, since that is one of the primary impacts of our current economy. After that, I think transportation impacts are the ones that our visitors notice the most, and so provisions related to that. We haven't addressed this directly, but I feel like underlying much of this is maximizing tax revenue per visitor. I think this is a larger conversation, but in terms of what do we want our tourism economy to be, and I don't think it can just be about more people. It really needs to support the community as efficiently as possible per visitor impact. And then the energy standards as a larger component of addressing climate impacts of tourism, which again is perhaps a broader conversation and might be, the energy component might be a worthwhile shorthand for while we deal with the RC zone, and then we can maybe, when we have the capacity in a few years, work on a climate change impact plan. It's more community wide, and then that'll inform our codes more generally.
Mike?
Mixed use. That's my simple answer. Top priority.
Okay.
Well, that was easy. Karen?
Okay.
I would say the same thing. It's mixed use. And then similar to Ronnie and Kaylin, transportation is so congestion with more growth is one of the biggest things that I think our residents feel is that push. And so if there's some way that I mean, there is already some code in there for transportation depot stops or whatever it is, but somehow to really encourage these developments to offer alternative, like the electric bikes or scooters or some other way of getting into town. And then water is again, that's going to be our biggest concern down the road. So that's where I'm at.
Well, and for what it's worth, I do think that you all have been fairly consistent with those comments. So it doesn't feel like there's been any change from this council, Nora.
Can we let the planning commissioners that are in attendance kind of chime in and just give us their insight or kind of answers to the big picture questions?
That would be great.
I mean, I don't really have anything to add. It seems like there's been a little bit of clarity provided. I feel like every time we've heard from the city council or had a joint meeting with them, there's been a little more inching that direction. Planning commission obviously agrees about the mixed use. We see this as being something that not only is opening the channels back up legally, but is getting something for the community out of it. And using that to incentivize mixed use development when we really have a need for that in town. So I think everything we've done has gotten us hopefully closer to that with the standards that Nora has been working on.
Okay. And is Luke still with us? You can figure out his mute thing.
There we go. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with Kaya. Like, I think mixed use is probably like the most important aspect of this for me as well, just to add some more like diversity to our economy and like to help meet some of the needs of our community, to kind of balance out some of the incoming like accommodations that are going to be built.
Great.
Mayor and Nora, we had Ruben join a little bit
good.
ago, so he's also here if you want to ask him questions as well.
Yeah, so Ruben, I'm just sort of asking the big picture questions that are up on the screen. You city council or planning commission or whatever, are you still really committed to this process? And are development standards the primary way that we want to regulate new overnight accommodations? And what community benefits are the most important to you to receive in exchange for new overnight accommodations?
I guess mixed use. Hopping in late. I don't know if anything was specifically brought up before. You guys hear me? Yeah. I guess housing, but those are the biggest. That's the biggest thing that I can think of.
Okay. Yeah. Great. This has been very helpful for me. And hopefully it's beneficial for the Planning Commission. We'll require everybody to watch this. And then the Planning Commission will start moving forward with this kind of piece by piece.
And so I just want to outline next steps. So it sounds like you had questions, big picture questions answered from the council. You, Nora, are going to go back with the Planning Commission and workshop the overnight accommodation details for the RC zone, I'm assuming. And then we'll see suggested code revisions coming back to us then. And so this council will await something from the Planning Commission regarding overnight accommodations at this point.
Okay, and I can also do some work on just sort of providing some ideas and a framework for the C2 and C3, just so we can start those discussions in the bigger context of the whole thing. but probably not really delve into those in much detail. I see that as being much more politically difficult because there are a lot of people that have lots that they originally thought they bought them thinking that they could do night rentals. So there's some people that feel like they're very invested in this discussion. So, which is good. I mean, it's great. We want their input for sure. But we can start talking about that. Okay.
Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
So I noticed in the code, we were still at 5% for commercial. And I am wondering if, because I thought at our last meeting, we were actually talking about more commercial space than that.
Well, and there's two ways to do it. Most of the major property owners and developers out there feel like 20% is really too much as a minimum requirement, but that they could get there through, you know, maybe some incentives. So it's a question of what do we want the minimum requirement to be, and then do we want to provide an incentive for, you know, additional commercial uses by allowing them to go a little bigger.
Yeah, I'm just curious if we even want to start out at 10% though, and not at 5. And I don't know what the temperature is of, you know, everybody else, but that's kind of, I mean, we've had that discussion a couple times. And then to Kaylin's point, I mean, there isn't any possibility we're getting out of the wahoo by changing these standards, is there? Or did I misunderstand you, Kaylin?
So Wahoo includes a provision for developers to using this, basically the same calculations that were used by BAE to show that the economics of their particular development don't support the exaction that we're requiring and argue for a lesser one. And we've discussed this in the context of other developments that have asked to utilize it. And so I'm concerned that a developer will say, well, since you're now requiring all these other things and here's the economics, and we can't afford to do nearly as much affordable housing as you've asked us to. And so I think this might be, perhaps Lori could give us some feedback on this.
Yeah, some we can certainly talk about more. You know, I think that requirement would still stand, but there's always the option, the code provides that sort of alternative option to propose something different based on an economic analysis. So I don't see that provision going away.
Lori, do you want to respond for just a minute? We only have a couple of minutes till we're starting our regular meeting.
Sure, I can be quick. I agree with what Nora just said.
Yeah, and they're two standalone ordinances. If we were to give a waiver under one because of another, that would have to come to you guys for approval. We wouldn't have the authority as staff to do that.
Okay.
Right.
All right, well, this has been a nice workshop to refocus on overnight accommodations. Thank you so much to the planning commissioners that joined us jointly for this meeting. Very much appreciated. And when the other commissioners watch, well, thank you for watching. Quick logistical question. Are we all to end this Zoom and then Zoom back in, or do we?
That's correct. Nope, we set this up as two separate Zoom meetings, so we'll need to end this one because we do have applicants for items on the city council agenda that have a different Zoom meeting that they'll have to join.
Okay, well then I will just say sign off for now. I won't ask for a motion to recess. We'll just sign off and sign back in. Okay, council? See you soon.